Marcus Thorne sat in the third row, his posture impeccable. As the chief financial officer of Vanguard Global, Marcus was a man defined by numbers, logic, and a clinical detachment from the chaos of the world. His suit was bespoke, his watch cost more than a mid-sized sedan, and his heart was currently a fortress of grief he refused to acknowledge. He came to this church not for faith, but for the silence. In the boardroom, people screamed for his attention. Here, under the soaring Gothic arches, he could finally hear himself think, or rather, he could try to forget. Tonight, the sermon was about the least of these. Marcus found it ironic. He looked around the room, property developers, lawyers, and socialites, all nodding solemnly while thinking about their dinner reservations at Alinea. He was no different. He checked his watch. 20 minutes until he could leave. Then a draft cut through the warmth. The heavy oak doors at the back creaked open. A woman and a small girl slipped inside. They didn't look like the congregants. The woman, Eleanor, wore a thin parka that had lost its puffiness years ago. Her hair was matted by the rain, and she moved with a weary, defensive hunch as if expecting to be told to leave at any second. Beside her, clutching her hand with desperate strength, was a girl no older than 7. Her name was Lily. She wore an oversized yellow raincoat and shoes that were clearly 2 sizes too small. They didn't sit in the pews. They stood near the radiator at the side, trying to stop shivering. Marcus watched them from the corner of his eye. He felt a flicker of discomfort. The logical part of his brain calculated their struggle, but the emotional part, the part he kept buried since his own wife's passing 3 years ago, felt a sharp, unwelcome pang. As the service ended and the "Peace be with you" echoes faded, the wealthy crowd began to filter out, carefully stepping around the puddle forming at the mother and daughter's feet. Marcus stood up, adjusted his coat, and began to walk toward the exit. He intended to pass them without a word. He had a car waiting. He had a life to manage. But as he reached the aisle adjacent to them, the little girl stepped forward. She didn't look at his watch or his suit. She looked at his eyes. "Sir?" she whispered. Her voice was thin, cracked from the cold. Marcus stopped. He didn't want to, but his feet felt anchored to the stone floor. "Yes?" "My mom says we shouldn't ask for things," Lily said, her eyes shimmering with a terrifyingly pure hope. "But it's almost Christmas and the stars are hidden by the clouds tonight. Can you help my wish just this once?" Marcus looked at Eleanor, the mother. She looked horrified, her face flushing as she tried to pull Lily back. "Lily, no. I'm sorry, sir, we're just leaving." "Please," the girl insisted, ignoring her mother. "I don't want a toy, I just want her to stop coughing. It's so cold in the car." The CFO of Vanguard Global, a man who moved millions with a keystroke, felt a crack in his fortress. The silence of the church suddenly felt heavy, expectant, and utterly devastating. Marcus lived his life by a strict set of variables: input, output, risk, and reward. To hand a $100 bill to a stranger was a temporary fix. It didn't solve the underlying systemic issue. That was how he justified his coldness. But as he looked at the girl, Lily, he realized that logic was a coward's shield. "The car?" Marcus asked, his voice lower than usual. "You're living in a car?" Elena stepped forward, her dignity fighting through her exhaustion. "It's a 2012 sedan, sir. It's dry mostly. We lost our apartment in October, when I couldn't keep up with the rent after the hospital bills. I'm working 2 shifts at the diner, but it's not enough for a deposit." "The heater is broken," Lily added, her teeth beginning to chatter again now that they were away from the radiator. Marcus felt the eyes of the remaining parishioners on him. Some looked with pity, others with the hurried indifference of people who didn't want to be involved. He looked at his driver, Arthur, waiting outside the glass doors in the black SUV. "Come with me," Marcus said. It wasn't a suggestion. It was the tone he used in the boardroom, but softened by an unfamiliar urgency. "Sir, we can't," Eleanor started. "It's 30 degrees outside and it's raining ice," Marcus interrupted. "I have a guest house on my property. It's heated. It has a kitchen. You'll stay there tonight. Tomorrow, we'll figure out the rest." Elena recoiled slightly. In her world, nothing was free. Everything had a hidden cost, usually a painful one. "Why?" she asked, her voice trembling. Why would you do that for us?" Marcus looked at the altar, then back at the small girl in the yellow raincoat. "Because," she asked, "and because I realized I've spent 3 years ignoring every wish I've ever made because I was afraid of the answer. Tonight, I'm tired of being afraid." He led them out of the cathedral. The transition from the sacred silence of the church to the roar of the city rain was jarring. Arthur, the driver, didn't blink an eye as Marcus opened the door for a homeless woman and her child. He was trained to be invisible, but Marcus saw the subtle nod of approval in the rearview mirror. As the SUV pulled away from the curb, Lily pressed her face against the window, watching the city lights blur. Marcus watched her, feeling the immense weight of the decision he had just made. He wasn't just giving them a room, he was letting the world back into his carefully curated vacuum. "What was the wish, Lily?" Marcus asked softly as they drove through the Gold Coast. Lily turned away from the window. "I wished for a wall," she said. Marcus frowned. "A wall?" "A big wall that the wind can't get through," she explained. "One that doesn't move when the trucks drive by." Marcus looked at his hands. He had built a wall around his heart for years, thinking it protected him. But hearing this child describe her dream of a simple stationary wall made him realize how selfish his own architecture had been. The Thorne estate was a sprawling piece of architecture in Lincoln Park, a mix of glass, steel, and history. When the SUV pulled through the iron gates, Eleanor gasped. She gripped the seatbelt, her knuckles white. To her, this wasn't just a house, it was a planet she didn't have a passport for. "Arthur, take them to the garden cottage," Marcus instructed. "Make sure the thermostat is set to 72. Call Mrs. Higgins. Tell her to bring over some soup and sandwiches and clothes. Lily needs dry clothes." "Immediately, sir," Arthur replied. Marcus didn't follow them inside. He went into the main house, poured himself a scotch and sat in his darkened study. He listened to the rain beat against the triple-paned glass. For the first time in years, the house felt too large. The silence, which he usually cherished, now felt like an indictment. An hour later, there was a knock on his study door. It was Mrs. Higgins, his housekeeper of 15 years. She was a no-nonsense woman, with a soft spot for strays, though she had never seen Marcus bring one home. "They're fed," she said, leaning against the doorframe. The girl fell asleep halfway through her grilled cheese. The mother, she's sitting on the edge of the bed like she's ready to run if the floorboards creak. "Is she sick?" Marcus asked. "Just tired, Marcus. The kind of tired sleep doesn't fix," she replied. She looked at him pointedly. "What are you doing? This isn't like you." "I don't know," Marcus admitted, staring at the amber liquid in his glass. "I saw them in the church. The girl asked for a wish. It felt wrong to say no." "Maybe you're finally waking up," Mrs. Higgins said softly, before leaving. The next morning, Marcus woke up early. He skipped his usual gym routine and went straight to the cottage. He found Elena standing on the small porch, watching the sunrise over the damp garden. She was wearing a sweater Mrs. Higgins had provided, looking small but resolute. "I can't stay," she said as he approached. "I have a shift at 8 a.m. If I'm late, I'm fired. And Lily needs to get to school." "I'll have Arthur drive you to work and Lily to school," Marcus said. "You don't understand," Elena said, turning to face him. Her eyes were red-rimmed. "People like you. You do a nice thing and then you go back to your life. We can't go back to ours. Every time we experience something like this, it makes the car feel smaller. It makes the cold feel sharper." "I'm not trying to be a nice guy, Elena," Marcus said, his voice regaining its corporate edge. "I'm a CFO. I look at assets and liabilities. Right now, your situation is an inefficiency I can't tolerate. Let me help you fix the foundation." "We aren't a project, Mr. Thorne. I know you aren't. But Lily is a child who deserves a wall that doesn't move. Let me provide the wall while you find the door." The following week was a blur of contrasts for Marcus. By day, he was negotiating a multi-billion-dollar merger with a tech firm in San Jose. He sat in glass-walled boardrooms discussing human capital and synergy. By evening, he was back in Lincoln Park, checking on the guest house. He had extended the invitation for them to stay indefinitely. Eleanor had resisted at first, but the onset of a brutal Chicago blizzard had forced her hand. Lily was now attending a local school, her tuition quietly handled by Marcus under the guise of a charitable grant from his foundation. However, the corporate world and the world of the least of these began to collide. "Marcus, you're distracted," Sarah, the CEO of Vanguard, said during a private briefing. "You missed a decimal point in the projections. You never miss a decimal point." "I'm managing a personal matter," Marcus said, rubbing his temples. "Is it the woman?" Sarah asked. She was sharp, always plugged into the city's grapevine. "The one living in your cottage?" "People are talking, Marcus. It looks unconventional. Is she a relative?" "She's a human being, Sarah, and she was living in a car with a 7-year-old. Sarah sighed, not unkindly. "I get the impulse, truly. But you're a public figure. If this goes south, if there's a history there, or if she tries to sue you, it's a PR nightmare. Just be careful. Give her a check and find her an apartment. Don't let her into your life." Marcus left the office feeling a simmering rage. Give her a check. That was the solution for everything in his world. But he had seen Elena's face when she talked about her late husband, a veteran who had fallen through the cracks of the VA system. He had seen the way Lily carefully folded her napkins, a habit born of having so little that every scrap was precious. They weren't liabilities to be managed. That night, he arrived home to find Lily in the main house, sitting on the floor of the library. She had books spread out around her like a fortress. "Looking for something?" Marcus asked. "I'm looking for the stars," Lily said. "My teacher said that even if it's cloudy, the stars are still there. I want to see if they look different from a big house." Marcus sat down on the floor, something he hadn't done since he was a child. "They look the same, Lily. They just seem closer when you aren't shivering." "Mum is crying in the kitchen," Lily whispered suddenly. Marcus stood up, his heart quickening. "Why?" "She says she can't pay you back. She says we're charity, and it's making her soul feel heavy." Marcus walked to the kitchen. He found Elena at the table, her head in her hands. A pile of documents was in front of her. Applications for low-income housing, all marked with "Waitlist 2-3 years." "Eleanor," he said softly. She looked up, her face a mask of exhaustion. "I can't do this, Marcus. I can't live in this beautiful lie and then go back to the street. It's killing me. I'm working 60 hours a week and I still can't afford a studio in a safe neighborhood. I'm failing her." "You aren't failing," Marcus said. "The system is failing. But I have a proposal, not charity. An investment." Marcus pulled out a chair and sat across from Elena. He didn't speak as a benefactor. He spoke as a strategist. "My company has a division that manages corporate housing," Marcus began. "We have a building in South Loop that needs a resident manager, someone to handle the day-to-day, the tenants, the maintenance schedules. It comes with a salary and a 3-bedroom apartment on the top floor." Elena blinked. "I don't have experience in property management." "You have experience in survival," Marcus countered. "You're organized, you're resilient, and you care about the details, because for you, details have been the difference between a meal and hunger. I'll provide the training. You provide the work." "Why me?" she whispered. "There are thousands of people in this city who need this." "Because your daughter asked me for a wish," Marcus said honestly. "And because I need to know that there's still a way to fix things that doesn't involve a spreadsheet. I need this as much as you do." The tension in the room shifted. It wasn't just about a job. It was about a bridge. Elena looked at her hands, then at the door where Lily was peeking in. "I'll work harder than anyone you've ever hired," Elena promised. "I count on it," Marcus said. The following weeks were a transformation. Eleanor began her training. She was a natural, sharp, empathetic, and firm. Lily settled into school, her grades soaring now that she wasn't doing homework by the light of a fading flashlight in a cold back seat. But the modern fairy tale wasn't without its shadows. Marcus's world didn't like the intrusion of the real world. At a charity gala in mid-December, Marcus was confronted by a rival executive, a man named Sterling, who took pleasure in finding weaknesses. "I hear you've taken in a stray, Marcus," Sterling sneered, loud enough for the surrounding guests to hear. "Very noble. Or is it just a midlife crisis? I hope you did a background check. Those people usually bring their problems with them." Marcus felt the heat rise in his neck. 3 months ago he might have ignored the comment or made a dry joke. Now he saw Elena's face, her dignity, her struggle. "The only problem she brought into my home, Sterling, was a mirror," Marcus said, his voice cold and clear. "She reminded me what it looks like to actually work for something. Maybe you should try it sometime. It's much more rewarding than inheriting your father's firm." The room went silent. Marcus didn't care. He walked out of the gala, the tuxedo feeling like a straitjacket. He drove himself home, bypassing the main house and going straight to the cottage. He found Lily and Elena decorating a small pine tree Marcus had bought for them. It wasn't the 20-foot masterpiece in the cathedral. It was small, slightly crooked, and covered in handmade paper chains Lily had made at school. "Look, Marcus!" Lily shouted. "We made a star!" She held up a star made of cardboard and gold glitter. It was messy and perfect. As December deepened, the Thorne estate transformed. The sprawling mansion, once a museum of silent luxury, now hummed with the quiet domesticity of Elena and Lily. But for Marcus, the presence of the child was a double-edged sword. It brought light, but it also cast long, forgotten shadows. The Thorne method of emotional suppression was failing him. On a quiet Tuesday evening, the library was bathed in the amber glow of the fireplace. Lily was sprawled on a plush Persian rug, deep into a book about the solar system. Marcus sat at his mahogany desk, ostensibly reviewing quarterly reports for the upcoming Vanguard merger, but his eyes kept drifting to the girl. She moved with a lightness that seemed impossible for someone who had spent months sleeping in a cramped sedan. "Did you have a little girl?" Lily asked suddenly. She didn't look up, her finger tracing the rings of Saturn on the glossy page. The question hit Marcus like a physical blow. The air in the library suddenly felt thin. He froze, his pen hovering over a document worth millions. The silence stretched until it was uncomfortable. "No," he said, his voice tight and brittle. "I didn't." Lily finally looked up, her head tilted. "Then why do you have a room with a pink rug? I saw it when I was playing hide-and-seek with Mrs. Higgins. It's at the end of the hall. It's very dusty, but there's a teddy bear on the chair. He looks lonely." Marcus slowly closed his laptop. That room. The North Hall. He hadn't turned the handle to that door in exactly 3 years and 2 months. It was a time capsule of a life that never began. That room was for someone who never got to use it, Marcus said, the words feeling like jagged stones in his throat. "My wife, Elizabeth, and we were expecting. We had the name picked out, Clara, but there were complications. I lost them both on the same day. The doctors, they talked about statistics, but statistics don't fill an empty nursery." Lily didn't offer a platitude. She didn't say it would be okay. Instead, she stood up with a grace that surpassed her years and walked over to the oversized leather chair where Marcus sat. She climbed up next to him, her small frame making the massive chair look even larger. She leaned her head against his cashmere-clad arm, offering the only thing she had, her presence. "My dad died in a hospital after he came back from the war," she whispered, her voice a soft vibration against his sleeve. "He told me he was going to be a star so I could always find him. He said the sky is like a map for people who feel lost. Maybe your wife and your baby are stars too. That's why the sky is so crowded, Marcus. There are a lot of people looking out for us." Marcus felt a sharp burning sensation behind his eyes. A sob caught in his throat, a sound he had buried under board meetings and balance sheets. He reached out, his hand trembling, and put his arm around the small girl. For the first time since the funeral, the permafrost around his heart didn't just crack. It vanished. Eleanor appeared in the doorway, intending to call Lily for bed. She stopped when she saw them. The powerful CFO, the man who could dismantle a corporation with a phone call, was sitting in the dark, being comforted by a child who had nothing but a yellow raincoat. She realized then that this wasn't a one-way rescue. Marcus wasn't just saving them from the freezing streets. They were saving him from a tomb of his own making. The fragile peace of the estate was shattered a week before Christmas. The Chicago winter had turned vicious, a blizzard howling through the iron gates. Marcus was in his study when the security alarm chirped. Arthur's voice came over the intercom, tight and professional. "Sir, there's a man at the gate. He's being persistent. He says he's family. Marcus checked the monitor. A man named Rick was standing in the snow, his face flushed with alcohol and cold. Rick was Elena's brother-in-law, a professional leech who had spent years chasing sure-bet investments with other people's money. He was the one who had drained the last of Elena's husband's life insurance, leaving her with nothing but a car and a child. "I know she's in there." Rick's voice crackled through the intercom, distorted by the wind. "I know she's staying with a billionaire. I want my cut, Elena. You owe the family for all the times we looked out for you." Marcus felt a cold, familiar rage. This wasn't the grief-stricken pain from the library. This was the predatory instinct of a man who defended his territory. He grabbed his coat and walked out into the storm. He met Rick at the gate. The man smelled of cheap cigarettes and desperation. "Can I help you?" Marcus asked, his voice like a slab of iron. "I'm family," Rick blustered, trying to puff out his chest. "That woman in there, she's hiding from her responsibilities. She's living in the lap of luxury while I'm struggling. I'll go to the Chicago Tribune. I'll tell them the great Marcus Thorne is keeping a runaway mom as a servant. Think about the optics, Mr. Moneybags." Marcus stepped closer, ignoring the sleet stinging his face. He had dealt with hostile takeovers and corporate raiders who were much more dangerous than this man. "Here is what is going to happen, Rick," Marcus said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "You are going to turn around and walk away. You are never going to call, text, or stand within a mile of Elena or Lily again." "Or what?" Rick sneered. "Or I will use every resource at my disposal, and believe me, they are vast, to ensure you spend the next decade in a courtroom. I have the best legal team in North America on retainer. I will audit every cent you've ever stolen. I will find every minor infraction you've ever committed. Do you have a lawyer, Rick? Or do you just have that cheap jacket?" Rick looked into Marcus's eyes and saw something terrifying. It wasn't the look of a businessman worried about a PR scandal. It was the look of a man who had finally found something worth fighting for. The bluster left Rick's body like air from a punctured tire. He muttered a curse, turned, and disappeared into the white haze of the blizzard. Marcus stood at the gate for a long time, watching the snowflakes fall into the yellow glow of the street lamps. He realized he didn't care about the board of directors or the gossip at the country club. He cared about the two people inside who had turned his hollow house back into a home. When he returned to the foyer, Eleanor was waiting. She looked small against the marble columns, her eyes filled with fear. "He's gone," Marcus said simply. "He won't be back. My legal team is already filing a restraining order." "You didn't have to do that," Eleanor said, her voice trembling. "You've already given us so much. Now you're taking on my ghosts too. It's too much of a burden." "They aren't just your ghosts anymore, Elena," Marcus said, stepping toward her. "We're a team, and in my world we don't let external threats compromise the foundation. Inefficiency is my enemy, and having you worry about a man like that is a waste of your potential." Eleanor laughed, a small, genuine sound that broke the tension. "You and your spreadsheets, Marcus. You even talk about feelings like they're a business merger." "They serve a purpose," he said, a rare, genuine smile touching his lips. That night, the house felt truly secure. For the first time in years, Elena didn't sleep on the very edge of the bed, ready to flee. She slept in the middle of the guest room's king-sized bed, knowing the wall Marcus had built was finally solid. 2 days before Christmas, the transition began. It was the day Eleanor and Lily were to move into the apartment in South Loop. The building was a jewel of industrial architecture, a refurbished loft with soaring ceilings, exposed brick, and floor-to-ceiling windows that captured the entire Chicago skyline. Arthur helped load their few belongings into the SUV. It was a strange sight. The few battered bags they had brought from the car were now joined by new suitcases filled with warm clothes, crates of books for Lily, and a high-end laptop Marcus had insisted was necessary equipment for Elena's new role as resident manager. Marcus stood on the driveway, feeling a strange, hollow sensation in his chest. "You're only 3 miles away," he said, as if he were the one who needed convincing. "We'll be back for Christmas dinner," Eleanor reminded him, reaching out to squeeze his hand. "Mrs. Higgins already gave me the grocery list. I'm in charge of the stuffing, and I don't trust you with the turkey." "And I'm in charge of the music," Lily shouted, dancing around the SUV. "Marcus, you have to promise to play the song with the bells." When they arrived at the South Loop loft, Lily ran straight to the windows. The view was breathtaking. The city was a grid of light, and the Willis Tower stood like a sentinel in the distance. "The stars, Marcus, look, we're closer to them now. We're practically living in the sky." The apartment was fully furnished, a secret project Marcus had spent the last week obsessing over. He had picked out a sturdy oak dining table, a place for homework and long dinners. He had ensured Lily's room had a desk facing the window and a bed with a thick quilted comforter. "It's too much," Elena whispered, walking through the kitchen. She ran her hand over the granite countertops. "I don't know how to be this person, Marcus, the person who lives here." "It's a signing bonus," Marcus joked, though his voice was thick. "Standard corporate practice for high-level talent. You're the manager of this building, Elena. You need to reflect the quality of the property." But they both knew the truth. Over the last month, the transformation hadn't just been Elena's. Marcus Thorne had changed. He was no longer the man who hid in the silence of a cathedral to avoid his own grief. He was a man who had participated in the messy, beautiful work of restoration. That evening, as Marcus drove back to his mansion, he realized he didn't want the silence anymore. He picked up his phone and called Sarah, the CEO of Vanguard. "Sarah, I've made a decision about the merger," Marcus said, his voice echoing in the quiet car. "I want to include a social responsibility provision. We are diverting 5% of the venture capital into a trust for transitional housing in the city, and I've already drafted the bylaws. Elena Vance will sit on the advisory board. She knows the gaps in the system better than any consultant we could hire." "Marcus, that's a radical move. The board will fight you on the margins." "Then let them fight," Marcus said. "I'm the one holding the checkbook. Tell them my human capital is currently invested in something with a much higher yield than money. Tell them we're building walls that don't move." Christmas Eve arrived with a soft, cinematic blanket of fresh snow that muffled the sounds of the city. The Thorne estate was glowing. For the first time since Elizabeth had passed, Marcus had allowed Mrs. Higgins to go all out with the decorations. Garland draped the banisters, and the scent of roasting turkey and cinnamon-spiced apples filled the air. Elena, Lily, and Mrs. Higgins were in the kitchen, a chaotic and joyful scene of flower-covered counters and bubbling pots. Marcus stood in the doorway, watching them. He felt a profound alien sense of peace. He realized that wealth wasn't the numbers in his offshore accounts. It was the sound of a child's laughter echoing off the marble. After dinner, they gathered around the massive stone fireplace in the great hall. The fire crackled, sending sparks dancing up the chimney. Marcus reached into the pocket of his cardigan and pulled out a small, elegantly wrapped box. He handed it to Lily. "Another toy?" Eleanor asked, leaning back against the sofa, a glass of cider in her hand. "Not exactly," Marcus said. Lily opened the box with trembling fingers. Inside was a heavy silver locket. On the front was an engraving of a single North Star. When she clicked it open, she saw two tiny, high-resolution photos. On one side was a picture of Lily and Elena on the day they moved into their apartment. On the other side was a photo of Marcus, Elena, and Lily standing on the steps of the cathedral where they had first met. "So you never forget that wishes aren't just things you make," Marcus said softly. "They are things you keep." "Thank you, Marcus," Lily whispered, throwing her arms around his neck. She smelled like peppermint and home. Then Marcus turned to Elena. His expression became serious as he handed her a thick manila envelope. "This isn't a gift, Elena. It's a contract. The Thorne Foundation has purchased the South Loop building. This envelope contains the deed to the manager's unit. It's been paid in full. It's yours, permanently. No matter what happens with the job or the company, you and Lily will always have a wall that doesn't move." Eleanor sat back, the air leaving her lungs in a long, shaky exhale. "Marcus, I can't accept this. That's a fortune." "No," Marcus said, his voice firm and certain. "A fortune is what I had before that rainy night at St. Jude, a lot of currency and absolutely no reason to wake up in the morning. You and Lily gave me back my life. You helped me open a door I thought I had lost the key to. You can't put a price on the feeling of being human again. Consider it a fair trade." Eleanor looked at him, tears streaming down her face, reflecting the firelight. She didn't see the CFO of Vanguard Global. She saw a man who had been shivering in a different kind of cold, and she realized they had both been saved from the storm. "Can you help my wish? Just this once," she whispered, her voice a perfect echo of Lily's plea. "What's the wish, Elena?" "Stay for breakfast tomorrow," she said. "Don't just be the man who built the wall, be the man who lives inside it with us. Be our family." Marcus smiled, and for the first time in 3 years, it reached his eyes. "I think I can manage that." Christmas morning in Chicago broke bright and clear, as if the city itself had been scrubbed clean by the fury of the previous night's blizzard. The storm had passed, leaving behind a world draped in a pristine, glittering white mantle. The heavy, suffocating clouds that had hidden the stars for weeks had finally vanished, leaving a sky so impossibly blue it looked painted, an endless canopy of sapphire stretching over the frosted skyscrapers. Marcus Thorne woke up in his sprawling master suite, but the familiar, cold efficiency of his morning routine was nowhere to be found. There was no chime of a digital alarm, no urgent vibration of his phone notifying him about the opening of the Tokyo markets or a dip in European bonds. Instead, he was pulled from sleep by a sound that was far more precious, the muffled, infectious giggles of a child echoing in the hallway outside his door. He stayed still for a long moment, lying on his back and watching the sunlight play across the ceiling. He savored the sound. He didn't think about the Vanguard merger, the upcoming battle with the board of directors, or the optics of his recent charitable turn. For the first time in years, Marcus wasn't calculating the future or mourning the past. He simply felt the warmth of the winter sun on his face and the undeniable presence of life in a house that had been a mausoleum for too long. When he finally emerged, he found Lily and Elena already downstairs. The kitchen was a mess of pancake batter and festive napkins, a sight that would have once made his skin crawl with a need for order. Now it just made him smile. Mrs. Higgins stood in the corner, a cup of coffee in her hand and a look of quiet triumph on her face. She knew the ice had melted. They spent the day in a way Marcus had forgotten was possible. It wasn't about expensive gifts or grand gestures. It was about the luxury of time. They walked through Lincoln Park, the fresh snow crunching rhythmically under their boots like the heartbeat of the city. The air was sharp and clean, stinging their lungs in a way that felt revitalizing. Lily, wrapped in a new, heavy wool coat that actually fit her, practiced ice skating on the frozen puddles. She would take a running start and glide across the silver patches, her arms out for balance, her laughter ringing out across the quiet park. Marcus and Elena walked side by side behind her, their shoulders brushed occasionally, a casual intimacy that felt more solid than any contract Marcus had ever signed. They talked about a future that felt real, not theoretical. They discussed Lily's upcoming science fair project. She wanted to build a model of the solar system where the stars actually glowed. They talked about Elena's ideas for the housing trust, focusing on the small details that large charities often missed, things like secure storage for personal belongings and dignity in the intake process. Marcus listened with genuine interest, his analytical mind finally working in service of his heart. They even spoke of the mountains, a real vacation in the spring when the tulips would begin to bloom, a world away from the steel and glass of Chicago. As the sun began to dip below the horizon, painting the snow in bruised shades of violet, gold, and deep orange, they found themselves drawn back to where it all began, the Cathedral of St. Jude. The evening service was about to begin, and the bells were tolling, their deep, resonant bronze notes vibrating through the cold air. They stood together on the massive stone steps, the exact spot where a desperate little girl in a yellow raincoat had once reached out and changed the trajectory of a billionaire's life. The world looked different now. The people filing inside still wore their expensive furs and tailored coats, looking down at the sidewalk as they hurried away from the chill. The wind still bit at the corners of the alleyways with a cruel, indifferent hunger. But the shadows didn't seem quite so dark. The light from the cathedral's stained glass spilled out onto the snow like a promise kept. "Are we going in?" Lily asked, looking up at the massive oak doors that reached toward the sky. Marcus looked at Elena, seeing the strength in her gaze and the peace in her smile. Then he looked down at the child whose simple request had saved him. Not tonight, Marcus said softly. Tonight, I think we have everything we need right here. The prayer was already answered, Lily. We don't need to ask for anything else today. Just then, Marcus noticed a man sitting near the base of the steps. He was huddled in a thin, ragged blanket that offered little protection against the rising evening frost. He looked much like Elena had stood weeks ago, invisible to the crowd, an inefficiency in the machinery of the city. Marcus didn't hesitate. He didn't just reach for his wallet to drop $100 bill and walk away to ease his conscience. He walked over and knelt down in the cold snow, getting on the man's level. He reached out his hand, not to give, but to connect. "My name is Marcus," he said, shaking the man's hand. The man looked up, stunned by the touch. Marcus spoke to him for a long minute, his voice low and respectful. He wasn't giving a lecture, he was offering a bridge. He reached into his pocket and handed the man a sturdy card. On it was the address of the South Loop building and Elena's name. "Go to this address tomorrow morning," Marcus said. "Ask for Elena, she's the manager. She knows what it's like to be where you are, and she'll help you find a warm meal and a wall that doesn't move." The man looked at the card, his fingers trembling as he traced the embossed letters. He looked up at Marcus, his eyes wide with a confused, flickering hope that was brighter than any Christmas light. He didn't say thank you. He didn't have the words yet. But the way he gripped the card told Marcus everything he needed to know. As Marcus walked back toward the waiting SUV, Lily took his hand on one side and Elena's on the other. She swung their arms back and forth as they walked, her silhouette a joyful, dancing spark against the vast white expanse of the park. "The wish worked, didn't it, Marcus?" Lily asked, her voice full of wonder. "It did, Lily," Marcus said, squeezing her small hand. "But do you know the real secret about wishes? The part they don't tell you in the stories." "What?" "They only work if you're brave enough to ask someone to help you carry them, and they only stay true if you're brave enough to carry someone else's in return. A wish isn't a gift, Lily. It's a partnership." The labels that had once defined them, CFO, homeless mom, billionaire, stray, had been burned away, replaced by something much simpler and infinitely more powerful. They were three people who had found a way to bridge the gap between the golden pews and the cold rain. As they drove into the Chicago night, the city lights reflected in the patches of ice on the road, creating a path of diamonds that seemed to lead them directly home. It was a home that was no longer a fortress of silence or a cold museum of grief, but a sanctuary of shared hope and warm breath. The modern fairy tale wasn't about magic wands, ancient prophecies, or impossible miracles. It was about the incredible life-changing power of a single honest question asked in the dark. "Can you help my wish? Just this once?" And for Marcus Thorne, the answer would always, for the rest of his life, be yes.